Okay, afternoon everyone. I'm actually therefore making 3 videos today, but this one I'm not going to be releasing until the energies are correct outside. I want people to be at their most ready to discuss this without becoming too triggered. But trigger warning, I am going to be truth talking, and truth talking sometimes is not fun. And it can be a very emotional thing for some people, especially right now with the way that the media has everybody fomenting and foaming at the mouth, calling people who aren't criminals, war criminals essentially, child killers, and being generally ridiculous. So we need to talk real and just be honest about everything that is going on as regards the right to bear arms. And this is pertaining to America, obviously. Now, some of you watching may not be from America. I can't speak to your legal rights. And so when I talk about human rights, I am using Americanism as the background, which, of course, Americanism is derived, Jeffersonian Americanism is derived from John Locke's ideas. And, of course, those come from the Protestant Reformation. And then those come from Christian ideals. So with that in mind, in that context, and the fact that America is, after all, overall still a capitalist country, right? I'm a capitalist. I engage in entrepreneurship with my small business. Therefore, I have that bent and that expression. But I also have the benefit of history as a hindsight. Just one second here. So I have a large list here to go through for this discussion, and I've tried to arrange it by the most important things for us to cover. Let's talk about, first of all, the human rights. I believe, this is a personal belief, that everybody has a right to defend themselves. I also personally believe in the right for a person or persons or a nation, state, etc., to make righteous war. Now, that doesn't mean that that can't be twisted and turned into ridiculous things. You know, mobs can take things too far. Certainly, if race is involved, it can be especially heinous. And nations can invade under the pretense of giving freedom or, liberating a group of people from tyrants, and really it's about destabilization. The United States of America, as an empire, as a corporate empire, engages in that regularly. I am for America as in the people, but I am against the machine of the military-industrial complex. So this is the elephant standing on the house here. It's not even in the room, it's so big. It's crushing the world, the size of this empire, and yet, karma being what it is, it's probably most likely to crumble of its own. So I still support, as a country, and our national sovereignty and protecting our borders, and it's incredibly important. I'm generally going to skew away from the immigrant topic right now. Let me just say, plain up, it is in the art of war that you need to protect your borders and your nation. However, it is also in the Chinese understanding that walls can actually cause cities to be invaded, whereas open cities often are left alone. So yin and yang in everything. But when we talk about human rights in America, we specifically have to refer, of course, to the rights granted by the Bill of Rights, which would be the first 14 now amendments. And of those, because the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of speech, press, right to organize, and of religion, because that is the, quote, most important, the Second Amendment is the most important. And the reason is because the Second Amendment was immediately created to protect the First. All the other amendments that come after were sort of afterthoughts to, hey, this is a thing the British did that we didn't like. If you are put up on trial, the charges should be clearly made. For somebody to search your house, they need a warrant. These kinds of things These were things that the British had been doing to Americans, and so the Constitutional Congress decided to put them into writing. But the first two were without a doubt set forth for two purposes. The first one, to provide the human rights that everybody has, and this is again the locking idea of the God-given rights. The Second Amendment was there to do two things. The first was to establish a militia to protect against, well, Native American invasions on the frontiers, and to protect against the British and the French and potentially the Spanish, the Canadians. It was to protect, because the French and Indian Wars wasn't very long before that. So it was incredibly important to the Americans at the time that they have a militia of people to work together for national defense. I'm going to return to this issue a little bit later on. The second was to prevent tyranny and guarantee the rights of the first. So again, if you have a natural right to live, human nature is to take that right away, usually with violence and force, sometimes coercion, blackmail, etc., which blackmail, of course, is illegal. Coercion is illegal, although it's happening. I mean, a lot of people are forced to pay hush money, but that's through civil lawsuit and agreements and things like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. However, there's supposed to be a guaranteed right against those things. The Second Amendment enables the individual to be armed to do that, and it's unambiguous. There's nothing ambiguous about the Second Amendment, and this has been agreed in D.C. versus Heller, that the right to bear arms is individualized, but isn't guaranteed to be not modified somewhat, although it shouldn't be infringed. The right to bear arms also includes knives, bows and arrows and crossbows, axes, swords, dart guns, pretty much anything you can think of. Of course, the rights may be modified in certain areas. For example, in the state of Kentucky, you can't carry knives that have spring load to them, or a butterfly knife. You can't carry brass knuckles, even with a concealed carry permit. So, fun fact, the concealed carry permit, by the way, was created as a classist and racist instrument to try and keep certain groups of people from having their rights to bear arms. So concealed carry is a new idea. It's not something that originally you needed to have for any purpose. As governments grew used to being able to tell individuals that they couldn't carry in certain areas, eventually it became assumed that you needed some kind of permit. In fact, I meet many people who actually think that you need a permit to own a gun. You do not need a permit to own a gun. When I worked at the gun store, we even sold to foreign nationals that were living here, and they had a green card. That's all you need. Of course, the FBI would put them on the waiting list, and understandably so, while they looked in to make sure that they were legal immigrants. However, there's nothing saying that somebody else can't come to America and enjoy the right to bear arms. So those are the purposes of the Second Amendment. And as regards the effectiveness, I've done the calculation. If you were to take the trained forces as a culture, as a community, and you were to look at their homicide rates, and you were to look at the untrained, supposedly, militia of the common citizenry, the homicide rates only differ by 0.5%. And that's a very small factor because homicide rates are already low. So for that extra 0.5%, yes, you have 0.5% higher rate of murders. However, you have now 100+ million people providing national defense for the country. Obviously in patches, certain areas such as the Southeast, the Northwest, the Midwest, Arizona, Alaska versus Hawaii might have higher defense, but the military can make up for those zoned regions of insufficiency with their own. We also have a lot of manufacturing centers for firearms and for guns. If people want to get rid of the Second Amendment, what they haven't thought about is all the industry that they would be killing. That is, and maybe they wouldn't care, but still, there are jobs that are provided through firearms and ammunitions manufacturing. And this mutual defense, this national security, is the original purpose of the Second Amendment, that and, of course, providing against tyranny. Now, I've mentioned one data. I'm going to mention another set of data, and I will put the links to the data for this below. I have a thing that I call the chance to die, like chance of death. The reality of the chances of death when it comes to homicide by gun and suicide by gun is it's very low and it's stable. It varies over a small margin from time to time. It went up in the beginning of, for example, in Obama's administration, and it reached an unusual peak of 0.41, and then it dropped back down again by the end of his term. And why it would increase at the beginning of his administration and then decrease, there's no clear answer. It's mostly, though, always between two numbers like 0.33 and 0.41 is way out of margin. It was unusual for it to get that high. I think that was 2010 or 11. And so it's pretty much a flat line. For all intents and purposes, statistically, it's a flat line. However, the firearms ownership is continuously increasing in volume of them. The rate per population is decreasing slightly, but the overall amount of guns that are in the United States is increasing, which tells you immediately that the murder rate is diluted by the amount of firearms available. So the more firearms there are, the rate has not changed, and in some cases goes down. And there are some data to suggest that, like certain towns that have more firearms in them, that and the citizenry have more open carry, that the number of violent crimes in them goes down. And there's, of course, massive data to suggest that socialist cities and socialist states suffer from rampant crime. The biggest ones being Detroit, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Southern California in general, Milwaukee. These are places where they have enacted socialist reforms of in order to control minorities, in my opinion. And it's ironic because a lot of it is the Democratic Party that's doing them. When you look at, for example, Freddie Gray and the shooting in Baltimore, the city council was majority black, the police chief was black, the prosecutor was black, and yet the people that are suffering are the minorities themselves. And this supports the data that most crime that is being perpetrated on African Americans is being perpetrated by other African Americans. So there's a cultural problem. The gun itself is not actually the cause. But you know what is going up in terms of death rate? It's not cars, actually. Drunk driving is going down. You may have been thinking, oh, more people are getting drunk. No. But the drugs, the overdosing, is actually going just on a steady incline. In fact, your chances of death due to overdose have about quadrupled in the last 20 years. And that is a really scary thing because it's when you talk about overdose, it's not necessarily true that it's only adults. That also includes children. Speaking of children, I mean, people want to talk about the protection of children. Well, obviously, teaching and arming teachers is going to provide a better overall solution. It is totally possible that a teacher could flip their lid, but if anybody knows what teachers are like, even the worst teacher cares more about children than half the parents in this country. And so I have no problem personally arming pilots, firemen, ambulance drivers, teachers. These are servants of society. They're the backbone of society. I trust them implicitly with my life. I don't trust a lifeguard with because of some kid, but I do trust people who have been licensed, educated, certified. They've gone through all the hoops. We know exactly who they are. We know what they do and what basically their education level is, and crime is related to education level. So there is no reason whatsoever to not arm the teachers if there is proper measures put in, fingerprint boxes in the room so that substitute teachers can't get to the firearm, or the children can't get to the firearm. But built into the desk, there's no reason absolutely that they can't have. But I also prefer the solutions like the kid that has it's like a lock that locks the door and it can't be shot out. There's no reason that invention and new thought can't go forward. The main cause of these school shootings is a change in culture. It's a change in the glorification among children of violent crime. Now, I grew up on violent video games, but they were all cartoonish. And now the video games, they make them as realistic as possible, and these children are being pumped through with imagery of highly violent deaths, much worse than Mortal Kombat was when I was a kid. It was bad enough, but now it's desensitizing them, and when they then glorify, and then they see, we have a culture where attention, if you're a child and you have not enough attention, and you see that people are going to get tons of attention via the media, then of course, that is a big attractor for extremely unstable kids. There's no good reason for our society to have not screened out these kids ahead of time and looked and seen, they have medication issues, they have violence issues, they lash out, they have authority problems. And there is no reason that shouldn't happen at a young age. And I mean, it's not like it's homeschoolers that are doing these shootings, right? These are kids that are totally identifiable. They didn't come from some Utah compound against, that's super violent, as shows like Longmire might suggest. They come from public schools, and they have a track record of history of shooting. And I'm leaving out, of course, mass shootings that, may be false flags. I'm not going to talk about Vegas right now. I'm just going to talk about the reality that we see with these children is that they are sick. And it's not the guns making them sick, because physical objects don't make people sick. Culture is making them sick. Not having children pay attention to them is making them sick. Reaching out with verbal, toxicity, and nobody responding and saying, hey, I care enough to say, hey, what's wrong with you? And the kid might say, I don't know. But we don't know because nobody did it. And that, to me, is the true issue here. That is the real illness that we have to look out for. Now, the media loves to get very emotional about this, or to coax emotionality. If emotionality and, quote, common sense worked, then ivory trade would be done, right? Who among us likes the slaughter of elephants and the rhinoceros going extinct? Nobody. However, the ivory policy is perfectly an example of how emotionality is not supported by facts and science can cause disaster. Burning ivory to try and get rid of this, that doesn't do anything. All it does is make the ivory more expensive, make the clientele more exclusive, and incentivize the poachers who are willing to put their life on the line to get that dollar. All right? Money walks and talks. And these poachers around the world, whether they're looking for stuff for Chinese medicine or they're looking for stuff for very rich people to wear or have in their home, jewelry or something, they will get that ivory because there's nothing to stop them. The thing that would stop them is to make it so available, so common, that there's no reason to. So, for example, if China enacted a rhino and elephant breeding program 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and had created herds of these animals, tremendous herds, of hundreds of thousands, and then harvested in a certain way the ivory, that would eliminate the market needs, or at least alleviate them, and keep the wild animals. Because, of course, then nobody would risk their lives going out there when they could go work on a farm where a capitalist is busy acquiring it. Do I like that solution? No, I don't like that solution. However, it is the solution that would actually work to save that rhinoceros, and because you can't stop greedy people. That's the thing about illness. And I need people to understand this, like the whole with the Me Too movement and everything. You can't stop bad people from doing bad things. Now, you can punish them afterwards, but you can't stop them from doing it ahead of time. They have twisted energies in them, and they're going to enact what they're feeling compelled by. Who among us has been in a fit of anger and just making an ass out of ourselves at the store or in family and saying things we don't mean to. Why? Because when you're in that state, you feel compelled to do it. You feel completely within your rights to do it. Well, that's the way a greedy person feels when they whether they're robbing someone or killing endangered animals, they're going to feel that way. In the same way, a person who is a terrorist, some kind of clan member who wants to kill people, which not all clan members are that way, by the way, or any extremist, when they are in that mode, they're going to do it, and they're going to be able to get those weapons. You will not be able to stop them. And if you think that only firearms are the issue, that's not true at all. As regards assault weapons, people not, quote, needing assault rifles, you can selectively ban certain manufacturers, but then they just manufacture a new one. This is the case of the Uzi 9mm or the Tech 9. People were there were states banning the Tech 9. Well, they just made different 9mm. If you try to say semi-automatic rifles, then of course people, that's also going to include regular rifles and regular shotguns. Most shotguns are semi-automatic by far, and same thing with handguns. You're getting into handguns. So by far the most crimes are committed with handguns. So, but also the most self-defense. Millions of people defend themselves, mostly. Well, police officers mostly, but secondly, women and the elderly frequently use handguns to defend themselves because it gives them leverage over a predator. The other thing that I'm against here is the politicization of the entire thing, and this goes back to the socialism and the Marxism and the leftism in general. I'm not going to call it liberalism because real classical liberalism is, liberty, fraternity, brotherhood, let live, kind of God-given rights. That's classical liberalism. If you're libertarian, you're a classical liberal. When we talk about leftism, it is a belief in the need to regulate, for the state to regulate society, to get people to behave a certain way, to do certain things. And in this way, politicization of the topic is most, to me, reflective of a national defense issue. Because when you start to see divide and conquer over and over again, and leftism is the only political ideology that I can identify that calls for disarmament of the people. And guess what? Around the world, when that happens, every time there's genocide. Socialism and Marxism have a huge history of genocide. The only bigger genocide is abortion. There is no other genocide, not even if you counted the smallpox among Native Americans, it could compare with the power of socialism to continuously abrogate responsibilities and take away rights and then lead to the deaths of millions of people. It is incredibly dangerous. The politicization tells me that big money is in there to ruin the sovereignty of the people. Remember, America is the people. And it is not just the corporation that is the federal government. The federal government can be overthrown or it can bankrupt itself, which is, it tries its best all the time, but they keep it from happening. That's a whole different discussion there. Hunting rights, of course, is a huge part, but I want to remind you that the Second Amendment is not about hunting rights. But even so, if you were to make certain looking guns illegal, I promise you they would just make different ones that the same functions, that could do the same things. You can have a rifle that looks like a hunting rifle and that does the same functions as an AR-15, which, by the way, is not a big caliber gun. I do believe in compromise and taking the needs of the citizens in effect. However, what I notice is that the need, education is, ignorance is always the enemy. So education is always the solution. So if there needs to be compromise, then what I would ask is, before we go asking lots of people to give up their rights to defend themselves, for women to give up their rights to stop violent offenders and elderly to stop abusers, then I would say, let's do a compromise like this. You get educated first on how firearms work and what the statistics are, what the values are, and the benefits of states where there's lots of guns versus states where there's socialist regimes and in charge. And then, if afterwards we find the same trend, right, and if our culture cannot get healthy, then I think compromise would be beneficial. Other than that, how could you ask for compromise? Because there's one group of people that are incredibly educated on the topic, and the other one is being emotional. And the emotionality is based on not necessarily knowing much about firearms or firearms culture. And in the end, it's going to be irrelevant anyhow, because I'm telling you right now, with the internet and 3D printing, all the things that you want to make illegal by banning are going to be anybody could make. You could 3D print a bump stock. You don't need to go and buy one anymore. So my belief personally is that we should arm citizens, that we should arm youth, and we should arm, and arm meaning also in education and education with facts. I believe in Americanism. If we're going to have an American country with a republic, then we should be fully on board with that. If we're not, because there are other systems you can have. You can have, capital naturalism. You can have, of course, a monarchy. You can have total oligarchy. If we're going to have that, then we should embrace that completely. But if we are going to pretend at all that we're a republic, and that we have democracy on the state and local levels, then of course I think it's important that people realize what the original rights are, what they were for, how they work, what is the process to own a gun. If you've never tried to go out and buy a gun and you're of age, and you're over 18 or over 21 for a handgun, I recommend you go try. You don't actually have to buy one to fill out the background check. Go and look at what the next check looks like. Go through it. I mean, obviously liars are liars, but when you start seeing it says FBI on there and you start, putting your name to it, believe me, that does deter people. So in conclusion, ignorance is the enemy. Data and facts are the reality. If we really care about children, then we should care about the things that are really killing children. We should definitely care about things that are going to affect them for long range, because kids die lots of ways, and there are better ways for us to handle it as a society, and that's just my opinion. And if you have a different opinion, feel free to leave a comment below, and let's talk about it, and I will see you next time.